let's start with maybe an easy question for starters. You were born and raised in Berlin, then left Berlin, then came back to Berlin. And if I understood correctly, right now Berlin is probably the only city you would like to live in. What is it about the city that makes it seem like the right place to be for you as a musician at the moment?
Well, for example, the studio is an unbelievable workspace. Berlin, the Senate allows me to pay 60 euros a month and work here 24 hours a day and have daylight. And I'm living here with my kids and my girlfriend, and I'm pretty much a full-time musician without having to do other work, because it's still at the brink of being affordable.
There's a piece on the new album which is called Entwurzelt, which translates as uprooted.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose it relates to that time spent between Germany and the USA. Can you talk about that for a little bit? This feeling of uprootedness?
It's basically kind of ingrained in my family history of being bicontinental, and here's the trumpet. My grandparents moved to the United States in the 30s from Germany, and my father was an American theater director who moved to Berlin in the 70s, then met my mom here. We moved back to the States, and I grew up in California, and I made a conscious decision to raise my family here and stay in one place, because it got too confusing in terms of self-identity at some point, this constant back and forth. And my kids can explore the world later, but I think it's nice to have a real strong feeling of this is my home for a while, for them too. But both has its pros and cons, for sure. I think musically it was a blessing to be a part of both continents as a teenager. I was in Berlin every summer, and I was studying music in California with amazing teachers. So to have this input from New York and then come to Berlin every year to influence me musically, to the point that I couldn't recreate being in one place.
The music you're playing is essentially a blend of jazz with contemporary electronic elements and elements from rock and pop. Mm. Do you think that the fact that on the one hand it's composed of jazz, which has been called the classical music of America, and then electronic music, which is sort of where Berlin is one of the capitals in the world, do you think that's sort of a representation of your own position in life? This sort of is it sort of a bridge between two cultures?
Definitely. And also the classical history of Germany, the German composers. I'm not a classical pianist, but I took a lot of harmonic inspiration from Brahms and Chopin and some Bach things in my compositions. And so the German elements are the harmony and the electronic aspects, for sure, yeah. And the phrasing and feel for the grooves is definitely more from the American side.
How did you get in touch with jazz? Do you still remember first experiences with the music?
It was in Berlin as a 6-year-old. My dad used to, I started playing Bob Dylan songs and blues and stuff like that. And I think it was an Oscar Peterson record called Night Train that started the entire thing for me. I got obsessed with jazz. And right when I started listening to Keith Jarrett and Oscar Peterson, we moved to America, and my piano teacher there was really supportive of having a 12-year-old that wanted to learn this kind of stuff. And my technique was awful, and I just wanted to learn how to play blues and bebop, and I had to relearn technique later because the excitement for learning the music was faster than my actual ability to play it.
Did you consider it a problem that you were playing classical music and jazz at the same time?
Well, I wasn't playing classical music in the beginning. Like most of my peers and colleagues started with classical music as a pianist and then switched to jazz, and I did it the other way around. I started playing classical as a teenager, but I already had this passion for improvisation and jazz when I started classical. But that's because I always had teachers and my parents who never imposed any rules on me with music. It was always a really free feeling. And I think that's the main reason I'm still a musician, because it's this feeling of that's my space where no one tells me what to do, you know. If I had had a really structured, strict teacher, maybe I wouldn't be a musician anymore. I don't know.
Do you think the perception of jazz in the States is different from what it is in Europe?
Perception from the audience or the jazz musicians?
I was thinking about the audience, but the musicians would probably be even more interesting.
I mean, it's the two worlds are merging. It seems like the most exciting new jazz that's coming out of New York or LA actually right now is starting to be similar to European jazz. None of it is straight ahead swing anymore for some reason, or very, very rarely do you hear actual swing. It's mostly groove oriented and odd meter and electronic influenced. But it's strange. There's in America you can, there's no middle class jazz musicians, meaning you have to be super successful to tour in the United States, it seems like. And in Europe you can sort of slowly build your way up. You can navigate throughout Europe through the jazz clubs, also because of the infrastructure with the cheaper airlines and stuff like that. You can be a touring musician and build up your career, whereas in America you move to New York and you work your way up within one scene and then you can start touring. It's a different process. But America has, the tradition of jazz, but the general mainstream public doesn't really support jazz as much as they do in Europe. It's always been like that throughout the history of jazz, yeah.
And you've always, I think from the very beginning, integrated songs from bands like Radiohead, even Nena, I think on your first trio album, 99 Red Balloons, into that cosmos. Is it because, and classical music, I think in concerts you perform quite a few interpretations of classical pieces. Is that because you see overlaps between these worlds, or is it because you see them as different and you want to sort of translate it into the world of jazz?
I see. I don't think about it that way. I basically pick and choose songs. When we do covers, they're based on if they work and if they inspire us. It's not that deep of a thinking. It's basically, do you guys feel inspired to do something with this, yes or no? That's the question with the trio. And sometimes, since they're from France, we have situations where they don't even know the song they don't know the original, and then we'll just be playing this cover song for years live, and then at some point they'll hear the original and be sort of confused. But yeah, I mean, I did a Prince song and David Bowie, and harmonically speaking, it's very close to jazz harmony. You know, there's not much of difference.
It's like a song like York on the new album.
Mm-hmm.
How does that sort of so it's a tribute to or is it a reference rather to Radiohead and Tom York? How does that sort of inspirational process work? Is it it would probably be, you could probably hear elements from song like Paranoid,
Mm-hmm.
Android in there, but how is that relationship between like a rock song and a rock band, experimental rock band, but and your own music?
Well, with Tom York, what I find inspiring is that his approach to singing melodies is really clear, and when I wrote that melody, it's almost like hearing him sing. You know, I just take my right hand, put some delay on it, and float over this sort of complex structure that the band is playing. That was more inspired not by Paranoid Android, but more his solo albums, like Atoms for Peace. Do you know that stuff? Yeah. So it's basically just intricate beats that keep changing, and then very simple voice with synth harmonies, no guitars or anything like that. But Radiohead is really easy to relate to as a jazz musician because it's interesting. Like the harmonies are much more complex than most pop songs. So it's plus most of it is in minor, but not just normal minor.
Or it's in major, but not normal major.
Yeah, exactly. So virtually most musicians nowadays that are improvising are playing Radiohead songs for that reason. You know, it's actually not very original anymore to play Radiohead.
Even though in your the live versions I've heard, you do go stray quite a bit from the original and then totally transform it.
Yeah. We end up going on a journey.
Let's talk about the trio for a second. I think it would be interesting because the trio the piano trio as a format is such an iconic format in jazz. You've been, I think it's fair to say it's probably the core of your work at the moment, in many respects. What keeps it interesting for you for such a long time to work within this constellation?
Well, there's something to be said to sticking with the same musicians for me. It's a relationship where you build up a certain trust musically and you don't have to prove yourself, and you end up making almost telepathic choices sometimes on stage just because you've been playing together for so long. And when I started with the first trio in 2002, musically I wasn't even ready to play solo piano yet. And I would structure the songs and my writing around my weaknesses as a pianist to try to hide the weaknesses. And now I'm much more comfortable at playing solo and soloing longer and building up. And so it keeps evolving because I feel like I can take a bigger part of the my role as the pianist. So it feels completely different now to be in a trio than it did 20 years ago, or 15 years ago. But the same guys that I've been playing with for 10 years are, they're also evolving. We're all getting better. And we also take breaks from seeing each other for 6 months sometimes, and we come back, and it always feels fresh, actually.
And in terms of, like, generally speaking, you also have a sextet, for example, and a duo. How, in terms of the relationship between the instruments, what makes the trio exciting and challenging?
In the duo that I have with Rainer Winch, the bass role gets taken over by him or by me via keyboards. So that's actually very challenging because you have less of a focus on your main instrument. And in the trio, the bass player takes a big part of the ambient sound effects. So I could actually do a concert with just an acoustic piano with no effects because Jerome creates this whole world already. We actually have to sometimes watch out that we don't overdo it with effects. If I show up with my Chaos pad and some pedals and a synthesizer or something, it's already too much. Because he has a Mugerfu going and some octaver pedals, and so we have to definitely be careful not to overdo it on that end. But he does much more than just play the bass in the trio. He creates this whole soundscape. And that is new. He used to just play acoustic bass in the trio, so it feels like a different band now, actually.
In a way, it's a quartet with a trio, like three musicians and technology.
Yeah. We used to play a song called "The Fourth Member," and that was the fourth member was the electronics.
What role does the piano play in the trio? Is it the lead instrument? Is it one amongst equals? It's in this particular trio, I mean.
It's definitely the singer and the orchestra. Yeah, it's the lead. But it's definitely a trio where everyone gets their moment. And I try to leave a lot of space at live concerts too. I try to leave space for them, just because I like the way it sounds. And actually, even on the album, my solos aren't very long. It's not the AABA melody solo head out type trio at all. It's more of a collective thing. But the piano is definitely the leading role.
Can you just very briefly describe the musicians you're working with on Drake?
Mm-hmm. It's Jérôme Ricard on bass, and he's very well-known bass player in France. He lives near Lyon, and he plays with Manu Katché and is basically on the road most of the year. And he has a huge part in arranging the trio's songs, especially in the studio. He comes up with rhythms and very important choices that we follow. And Mathieu Chezarank is a great drummer from Paris, he's been playing with me for 12 years, and without him there wouldn't be a trio. He's a huge part of the sound, and he plays a lot in France with his own band now, and he comes up with really specific parts. He's not like just jamming jazz drummer style. It definitely feels like he has created an orchestrated drum part for each song, and that gives it kind of a real band feeling. Even after not rehearsing for 6 months, he'll end up on stage falling into as a starting point into the same pattern that is on the record, and then we take it somewhere else. But he like when we do 2-week tours and we always play the same songs every night on a tour to develop them. They both manage to come up with new stuff every night to keep it interesting, which I'm very thankful for, because it would get really old, you know.
There were 4 years, I believe, since the last album,
Mm-hmm.
Siskiyou, and this one. Was that just spent doing other things, or was there sort of the feeling that you needed to recharge the batteries for this project?
I don't even know how it happened. I had a son during that time, and I guess I was out of compositions. Yeah, I had to figure out what to record, and actually the album was recorded in 2 sessions that were 1 year apart. So we've been working on this record for 2 years. So it's time to get it out there.
Was there, I think maybe it would be interesting to talk, just maybe you can recount the story of how, I believe a gig where everything went extremely fluently and magically almost,
Mm-hmm.
was sort of a starting point, I think, for the project.
For this album,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, it was a gig at the X Jazz Festival at the Fluxbau in Kreuzberg, and I don't know how that. Oh, we had just recorded Siskiyou, the album, and we hadn't seen each other in a while, and then we just showed up, not rehearsed at all. Not much time together in the same city. Just went to sound check and set up all the effects and went up on stage, and was super relaxed, and it was that feeling of not having to prove anything and comfort. I just felt like really super comfortable on stage. It was almost freaky. And people came up to us and said, we've never seen you guys this relaxed. What the hell is going on? And like we talked about before, they have this ability to ground me, to not overplay, and when I overplay I get a lot of shit for it.
That energy carried over into the recording of the album.
Mm-hmm. And into the process of writing these songs.
It's
Sorry, but the album is more definitely song oriented than one soloist at a time. Yeah.
You said you've worked on the album for 2 years. Is there still an underlying theme, do you think? Because it's sometimes hard to stick if you have an idea for the whole album. It's hard to stick to it for a longer time. So is it more different moments rather than one leitmotif, or is there sort of a unifying concept behind it?
I mean, the unifying concept was just that both recording sessions were as relaxed as this concert, and I've never been in the studio where it just felt like everything's gonna be all right. Like it wasn't a stressful recording session at all. It was 4 days in total, and maybe because we took so much time in between the first and the second recording date. We were so familiar with the material that it seemed like we could. I mean, we recorded a lot of songs in different ways, and then would experiment in that time rather than trying to get everything done. Like the first and second album from the trio, they were recorded in one day and mixed in one day. So 4 days recording and 4 days mixing. For this one is already a luxury for us. It's almost too much time. If we had 2 more days, it would be a shitty album. Overproduced.
Did you re-record some of the songs from the first session in the second one?
No, we didn't have enough songs, so that's why we had to go back. And I think 2 of the songs from the first session didn't make it on the album. Not exciting enough. Because we also have this rule that all 3 of us have to sign off on a give and take that ends up on the record.
What is the process for the recordings like? I think you bring some material and then you work on it as a trio? Or do all of the members bring song ideas to the table?
Mathieu, the drummer, writes 1 or 2 songs per album, and Jerome actually never brings a song, but he ends up playing such a big role in the arrangement process that it evens out. And I always send them the stuff beforehand. I make MIDI sketches and record little demos in Ableton Live and send it to them, and I write out some sheet music. But then when we're together, everything changes. I'm not the kind of band leader that comes in and says you have to do it this way, because I'm actually happy with their input most of the time.
And I believe there's a ritual at the beginning of each recording session, the evening before you start recording.
We cook, or they end up cooking a gigantic 4-course meal, yeah.
The benefits and say hardships of working with French musicians.
Exactly.
Is there a background to the name Drake for the album?
It started actually this morning. A friend of mine stopped me on the street and asked me if it had to do with the rapper. I'm gonna get that a lot this year. But it actually originated from the song Drake that I wrote. Somehow reminded me of harmonies from Nick Drake, the singer-songwriter. But then it morphed into this idea of mythical creatures like dragons. So then Drake sort of made sense in more than one way.
Do you listen to hip-hop?
Yes, I love hip-hop. But I'm more into old school hip-hop.
One of the things I think which stands out on the album is the beautiful piano sound. Was there a sort of a reference for you personally? Is this sort of an artist or a recording aesthetic that you personally really like and that maybe you were trying to achieve on the album?
The ECM sound was a big go-to model, But the studio just had this amazing piano and it just felt right. And that actually had a huge impact on how I end up playing too. When you're comfortable, when you have a piano that sounds where all the overtones are right, then you can relax. You don't have to do much. We're actually definitely doing our next album there because they just got a Steinway D. Although the Yamaha was great, so.
maybe just, you think you mentioned ECM. The album sounds, I think, slightly less ethereal than some of the ECM stuff. Was there in terms of the sound or the production, is there a direction you have for the trio, like a sort of an fixed idea on how you want it to sound?
The electric bass was important, but not in the traditional sense of funky bass lines. Just to have this sub octave type vibe where most of the time he's playing octaver and it's super low, but held back. Like we were recording sometimes 4 or 5 bass tracks, and then mixing the bass tracks took some time because if you do it wrong, it dominates most of the piano sound. So I'm a big fan of electronics and subwoofer type stuff as long as it's subtle. You know, having this real sparse, just nuance. Like you said, you only notice the electronics when you're really listening in detail with headphones, for example. Yeah.
Even though I was referring to some of the drums in that case, like that piece, like
Rise.
Yeah, Rise to the Occasion. Yeah, where it's sort of could be live if you listen to it on speakers, and then you listen on headphones and you realize how much is going on.
Yeah, we morphed the sound in the mix with Volker. He put some phasers and even distortion on the drums at the end. Yeah, but that's because that song is really static. It's like there's 2 drum beats going on, left and right, and I felt like there needs to be some kind of evolving sound happening on the drums.
So you're recording the album in what is still a relatively short period of time, and then you spend quite some time fleshing it out in the studio.
Yeah, and we recorded it in Paris, and then I mixed it in Berlin with Volker Meitz, great keyboard player and pianist. And I would say maybe 30% of the sound happens in the mix, and it's a really important step for this music, because it's not a classical, a generic acoustic piano trio sound.
And then when you go take the songs live, you use the versions from the album as a point of departure?
Exactly, yeah. We model the live sound on the recording. And then that works as good as the sound systems are in each venue we play.
And when you were recording the music, was it usually one takes? Was that sort of take one, or do you collect from assemble the pieces from different takes?
That's funny. I think there was a real, if I remember this correctly, in the first session, that was a year earlier, that was more of a live session where we actually ended up using mostly the first or second take because it felt the most lively and fresh. And then usually if I have a soloing part, it sounds more unique on the first take, and then maybe here and there we do some overdubs for the fixes. But on the second session we would really build some of the songs with click track and really piece it together, especially if you have more than one drum part, you have to do that. And I was playing piano and Fender Rhodes and some synths, so it's almost like a pop tracking session then at that point.
Yeah, I was thinking of that as well. You're sort of treating the sessions as materials which can then be infinitely reworked and shaped,
yeah,
sculpted.
But it's actually sort of an easier way to work because you know exactly which take it's gonna be, and then you actually just record the take one time, and then you put down the bass and drum part, then you put the melody down, and then you put down 3 or 4 bass tracks with different effects. Then you shape the song in that way. Rather than, let's hope this take's gonna be the best one. You know, there's no room for error. If you're working in a tracking mode, it's a little safer in the studio. But then you have to watch out that everything doesn't become too static and boring. So it's a balance. That's why some of the songs have more of a live feel, and then some of the songs have more of a produced electronic feel.
But even the live feeling tracks could be processed.
Yeah. I think most of them are played with click. So you could actually remix them too. Yeah.
I think you said that it's probably your most song-oriented album so far. Why aren't you, for example, working with a singer? You could probably include a few vocal pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Why is it more interesting to do it on the piano?
I just haven't really spent time looking for the right singer. I was involved in a project in New York with Hillary Maroon in a band called Maroon that went on for many years, and that was before I had my trio. It hasn't really it just hasn't happened. There's no reason. But to find someone that actually writes the right kind of lyrics and is a perfect match, is not going to just happen. It has to be the right person, obviously.
I wanted to talk about a few tracks individually, but maybe before we do that, the album as a format is, of course, been in a state of transition for many years, simply because of the fact that streaming, downloads, and the possibility for listeners to essentially program their own playlists and listening habits has sort of questioned the old idea that there's one physical carrier that you put on and then listen to from beginning to end. And of course the listening situation has changed, that very few people actually, I think, sit down for their listening experience but consume the music on the go. You're still recording albums. This is, I think, your 6th album now.
Yeah.
Why is the album still relevant to you, other than maybe just functioning as a business card? What makes it artistically interesting to still record albums?
It's that's interesting that you asked that, because that's maybe I'm still from that generation, maybe the last generation that remembers albums. I'm sure my kids will just have separate singles going the whole day. But I actually even think of a CD as a LP with 2 sides. So tracks 1 through 5 or 1 through 4 are one side, and then in my mind there's a real rebuilding of energy halfway through the album. And that comes from, as a teenager, actually still turning the record over. And that's how I learned it, is that you kind of pace a CD that way. And the song order is a huge factor in whether or not someone's going to keep listening. So you could actually spend if you have this feeling that you have 4 songs that are your best. The question is, if you're from the Spotify culture, do you put those first? Or if you think in terms of an album, you have to spread them out, to make the entire album worth it.
And in the case of Drake, you went for the album approach.
Yeah. And thankfully, I don't feel like any of them are much worse than others. There's like they're all sort of equal, so that made it much easier.
Let's talk about. I selected 4 pieces. Maybe we can. This may be interesting for the EPK. Just the background to the pieces. Maybe sometimes just the titles or maybe the music. Tears.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe tell a little bit about
the title?
Yeah, the title and how the music relates to it, if it does.
That was written by the drummer Mathieu, and he was going through some hard times in France, and he wanted to actually call it Tränen in German, which I thought was a little too pathetisch. Or not pathetic, but
melodramatic.
Melodramatic. And it's a actually really emotional song for me, and it has a real nice build up and very simple structure, but it works. There's this key change from E minor to G minor in the middle that really is uplifting too. Yeah, that was just a real emotional song. So you kind of have to overlook the fact that it's kind of a corny title.
I would never have guessed that it wasn't written by a pianist.
Yeah.
Because it's a really lyrical piano melody.
Yeah, that one was written by Mathieu.
Here to Stay?
Here to Stay is really grounded in my family. There's one feeling of being really grounded once you have a kid, and then having 2 kids really is a tight bond with your partner, and it's just this unquestionable feeling of being there for the rest of your life, which just makes you feel really grounded in everything else you're doing. So here, that's what that means.
It's gonna happen?
It's gonna happen was just actually as a joke. It was first called It's Not Gonna Happen, and it was just referring to getting the next record deal basically. And then we thought it would be too depressing to call it that. And now we're on Ocella, so it worked.
Yeah, maybe just a few words about how you ended up there.
I emailed Dagobert Böhm, and I came across the label because of Ikari Ikonen and Helge Lian Trio. And I've not just musically but visually, the website from the label really spoke to me, and I could sense that there was a real careful respect for the musicians they have. It wasn't just a label that just throws stuff together. Like, it's really a concept label. And I initially sent him a demo, and after a couple months we came to an agreement, and I'm really happy with them. Really happy to be there.
What's up? So maybe that's the last question. What's up next? I think you mentioned when you're playing live, the pieces will be played differently each time. Do you already have some ideas on what direction that will go? Are you touring the album?
Well, we're starting in April with 2 concerts, and then we're playing in the fall, and then we're definitely doing a Japan tour, which is great. We're playing in Berlin at the A-Train April 9th, and at Schloss Elmau, and we're definitely, for this year, whenever we play concert, we're gonna play the stuff from the album, because we've been playing in the live shows. We've been incorporating a lot of the old songs, the old hits, and it's time to just play new stuff. We need it for ourselves, basically. Yeah, and also to present the album, we should be playing the stuff from the new album, I think.